I said I was kind of giving up, but then there was the aha moment where I basically said, well, I can change everything about how I live life right now, or I can die.
Hello, and welcome to The Art of Lost and Found, a podcast all about the process of creative recovery. From those low lows to the high highs, this podcast explores what it means to be a truly creative person and how creativity is a superpower that we all have that we can use for our own well-being and transformation. I'm your host, Brooke Eston. Johnny Reyes is a globally renowned music producer, recording artist, DJ, and film composer with a rich background in artist development, live engineering and events, production, post-production, and writing for TV and film, among other things. He began doing warehouse parties in the San Francisco-Oakland rave scene at the tender age of 14. He went on to work in Santa Barbara, Los Angeles, and eventually Hollywood, California. His story took a dark turn as he found himself deep in the hedonistic party scene, where he was battling debilitating addictions, depression, and even a suicide attempt. He eventually went to rehab, where he learned how to evolve his creativity without the need for his dangerous and addictive vices. He maintains his sobriety and continues to support others who are battling similar demons by offering addiction coaching and recovery support. In addition to more traditional work, he's also the co-founder of I Am Retreats, a healing retreat company focused on amplifying wellness through sound science and personalized audio production. Johnny believes his life purpose is to improve people's lives through sound and vibration. He believes that amplifying a person's vibration is a pathway to sustained transformation. Johnny and I met through a mutual friend who is continuing to battle her stage 4 breast cancer. Johnny's kindness, gentle energy, and creativity was so welcoming that we immediately connected. And now, here's Johnny. Welcome to the Art of Lost and Found podcast. Thank you so much for being here.
Thank you for having me.
It's my pleasure. So I wanted to invite you onto this podcast specifically because although you are a professional creative, you're a musician and have done quite a number of creative ventures in a variety of different areas. One of the things that really struck me about your story and how that aligns with my vision of creativity is the process of reinvention. So the reason I called this podcast The Art of Lost and Found is because I wanted to tell stories of creative transformation. And when I say creative transformation, I mean from low lows to high highs. To I thought my life was going to be this way, and it turns out my life is this way. And sort of that process of reconnecting with some part of yourself that has been suppressed. For a lot of creative people, it comes in the form of not believing that they are fully creative. Yet when you look at the most creative beings on the planet, they're children. Kids are living in their creative energy. They are living in their imagination. They're exploring their environments. They're piecing new things together. They're constantly indulging in their creativity, yet most of them have no skills whatsoever. So when I talk about creativity, I'm talking about curiosity, transformation, evolution, and really building your sense of identity based on the experiences that you have. So with all of that in mind, you have reinvented yourself from some low lows a number of times.
I have. Mm-hmm. That's very true. And it's interesting that you bring up the child aspect as well, because, for people when they go through reconnecting with themselves, when they lose themselves, typically what they're reconnecting with is their inner child. What they're reconnecting with is that sense of wonder, that lack of clutter in their life. Even with trying to free up time, what are we really doing? We're connecting with that time in our lives when we didn't really have anything else to think about but just being. And in that being comes that creativity, comes that wonder and imagination. And there's no voices telling you that you can't do anything. It's just, what do you feel like doing? Let's go do it. And so it's interesting that you bring that up, because it's true. And, I also have a retreat company called I Am Retreats. And reconnecting people with who they are and helping to shift their way of being, which is the mission of I Am Retreats. We work to help people process trauma and different things. What we really are doing is reconnecting them with their inner child and their inner childlike wonder. And we actually use audio, in certain cases, their own voices to do that. We give them meditations with their own voices. So then they're allowed to they're able to listen to their voices to help them overcome these times of being stuck. And also we find that it helps people with public speaking and everything. But it's that inner self that they're connecting with through it. So, I mean, that is really kind of everything. If you think about it, returning to that moment, because generally at one point we went off on a tangent and started creating a whole other story as to, who we think we should be and what we think we should do, and left that child behind.
Yeah. By filling the channel with all of the noise, even going continuing with that metaphor, even putting a metaphor of sound on there. It's like you can't hear what's underneath anymore because there's so much static. There's so many voices. There's so many things happening in that channel that it's hard to identify what part of that is me. And that's like that. It's so perfect that's the way that you described what you do with your I Am retreats, because I believe that's it. That is the fundamental goal, right? Is to get back in connection with the purity of yourself, the divinity of yourself, the clarity of yourself. Yet so many of us, probably all of us, grow up in environments where that channel gets clogged and gets kind of just increasingly noisy. And so much of the work that we need to do to heal, to realign, to get back in touch with ourselves is really removing the noise. It's less additive and it's more subtractive, right? So by identifying and removing these elements, it gives you space to then be able to create, to be able to build, to be able to touch that place that is so deep inside of us, that is our raw authenticity, that we at some point were told, often multiple times throughout our lifetime, that it doesn't have value. It's not welcome. There's something that's fundamentally wrong.
For sure. And it's interesting that you bring up the whole subtractive aspect, because in music, when people are asking how to produce music, and one of the biggest things that I tell them, and this is applicable to a lot of things in life, is it's not about adding more things. You can be like, even in sound, like when you're mixing live sound, everything is thought of in a subtractive headspace sort of way, where you don't typically add stuff, you don't turn things over zero, actually. Like, you subtract things, and then between 0 and negative. And so it's actually, it's a common mistake that people make. Like, oh, I just need to add stuff. I just need to turn it up. Like, I just need to amplify things and turn everything up. where really it's like you can actually just turn other things down and then you can hear everything a lot more. And so very applicable to life and very applicable to, I think, all areas of creativity. If you look at any sort of creative thing, they're not terribly, they could be complicated in maybe in process and how you get there, but the message of what they are is generally not terribly complicated. Goes down to some very simplistic root feeling that we have. So yeah, I mean, I think that's very much something, and you know, I can talk about my story a little bit, and that's my whole life now is actually very simple.
So I would love to start, before we get from the kind of breakdown in the reinvention stage, I would love to take it all the way back to the beginning and see if you can recall when you were a young child how your creativity revealed itself to you. Was it in your mind? Was it in your physical environment? Were you imagining stories of other worlds? Were you building cities with Legos? Were you catching bugs and creating a zoo? Like, how did your creativity express itself for you when you were a child?
That's a great question. Wow. Okay. Common misconception actually about me is that people, because I'm in a place where I've done some film composing and I've done some composing for different things. People think that I'm classically trained, and I'm not. I'm self-taught, but I'm also like play by ear. And that's how I started. As a kid, I was like, I would listen to famous compositions and play them and learn how to play them by deconstructing them. And I think that that's always been a form of creativity for me. It's why ultimately I got into DJing and ultimately I got into music production, is because, and then composing, is that all of that is about deconstructing things and then recreating them. As a kid, my parents said, here, we want to nurture your creativity, and got me a piano. And with the piano, I would come home, be in my headphones and literally just play piano. And then, so it was guitar, and then I played guitar, and that was the same sort of thing where I was subscribed to Guitar Magazine, and every issue came with some new songs to learn how to play. And so I was doing like guitar tabs, I think is how I learned. And then I would just learn as many songs as I could. And so that was my creative outlet. When I was 14, I got opened up to the world of DJing. So I was already kind of into blending music together and editing music. A long time ago, I started using this program called Acid, and it was like a very early music editing program. And I started kind of just putting songs in there and kind of mixing them around together and playing with them. And then with DJing, I had a record player, and my dad actually had a really extensive record collection. And so he gave me a bunch of his vinyl, and I had one record player. And then for Christmas, I think it was, or my birthday, one of the two, it was around those two. I think it was Christmas. I got another record player, or another turntable, and a mixer. And so I could go between my record player and my one turntable. And so I would go between two songs, just like back and forth in one direction. And then for my birthday later, I ended up getting the second turntable. And so then on vinyl, I would just be in my room, and it was just every day for 3 hours a day. I would say about 3 hours a day, I would spin records and just play with records, learn how to scratch, learn how they moved, how they existed, how to like manipulate them. And then I would go and shop for records. It was a very like therapeutic experience for me. And then that's how my creativity really started to blossom. it was through DJing.
And it seems like your family, with your parents investing in a piano for you and saying we want to nurture your creativity, and then the extensive record or vinyl collection that you said that your father had, it seemed like your parents were really supportive of your artistic journey and expression. Do you have a sense of why? Because that's relatively uncommon, at least from what I've seen. Where I mean, did your parents have artistic or creative lives themselves?
Well, no, although they were creative in their own right, it was an avenue that they didn't pursue. And so I think that they both worked for AT&T and Pacific Bell. And so they had very linear corporate jobs. And so I think that they saw in me that I wasn't, that they should nurture that they should nurture the creativity. I don't know if they saw that I was going to make a career out of it, but they probably saw from a young age that I was a little outside the box. But I think, yeah, my parents saw something else there, and they just wanted to give me an opportunity and to nurture that. After I was in college, and I ended up at one point sitting down with my mother and my stepfather, having a conversation, going, "Hey, I've gone through college to this point. I'm already working in the industry as a creative. Like, this isn't for me. This is my path." And my mom wasn't surprised. She was just like, I get it. I understand. Like, this is just not for you.
So tell me, I'm curious with this, with that story of being so artistically and creatively expressed and having such a supportive environment around you. I'm curious. The last date that you mentioned was when you were 14. I'm curious to hear how things took a different turn for you, particularly around the addictions and kind of the self-destructive behavior. And how do you see that related to your creativity? And was there any kind of catalytic moment that you can remember that really helped facilitate that downfall?
With DJing, it was actually, I started my DJing I remember the first place that I ever played was a rave in Oakland. I was growing up. It was during the 90s rave scene in San Francisco. So Oakland had a really actually beautiful rave scene. And so I started there. And substances were pretty regularly used in that scene. So I started in that scene, and then I ended up in LA. I went to college in Santa Barbara. In Santa Barbara was a very big party school, and so there was a lot of partying kind of going on in my life. Frat parties and all these parties. Anybody who went to school in Santa Barbara, there was a strip called DP that was like the main strip, and there were parties at every balcony and DJs from there. So I went from there, and then I went to LA and got into the LA club scene. I was a resident at clubs in Hollywood and different places, and then I was in the music industry there as well. That whole industry, the club industry, I was paid to drink and to party, and so throughout all of that, I had some depression that was just unresolved. All of that kind of came to a head, I would say, in 2012. And in 2012, I was brought on as part of a group, like an artist named Mia, brought me to help produce and play at her show at Coachella. And so I was invited to play at Coachella, which is like a giant milestone of career, and for me was a point at which I saw it all as a problem. That was a moment where I just realized, and that was my first super paralysis creatively, that I hit, because I was scared and I was like, this is the path that I'm on. This is the way that I'm going. In fact, I was even making decisions surrounding me of people that I brought in that I think I kind of knew would block me a little bit, almost like I was self-sabotaging in certain ways out of that fear. And I noticed it now in hindsight, but of course at that time it was subconscious. I had no idea that I was actually doing those things. And in fact, all the decisions I was making creatively were all collaborations. None of them were just me making things. They were always other people. They were always me supporting other people, doing other stuff. I was doing ghostwriting. I was doing all of these different avenues that weren't me. And it kind of showed that my creativity wasn't going into myself because it wasn't coming from a place of self-love. In fact, all of those things were coming out of actually fears of abandonment. And so then which I can touch on later. But so all of that, it started there. And then my depression escalated from that point to where, even though there were a lot of things that I kept getting and different milestones I was hitting, it made me more and more unhappy. And then, and so the more things that I got, the more, any sort of win that I would have would feel empty. Didn't feel good at all. And so my substance abuse got worse and worse until it got to a point where I was literally suicidal. In fact, in the end of, I believe it was 2015, 2016, I had a suicide attempt. I tried to take my own life, and I woke up. I woke up a day later. And at that point, I was still trying to think my way out of all of this. That was kind of the big thing, is that, if we're talking about creativity is a soul activity. Creativity is a heart-centered activity. And at that time, my head was totally running my life. Everything was about how to keep this whole game and all of this stuff going, how to outthink it. So at that point, after the suicide attempt, I went and got clinical help. And so I was like, oh, I can just go to therapy. By the way, I wasn't thinking that, I could stop drinking and I could stop partying. It was more of like, I could just add therapy to this. And then,
back to trying to add things to solve the problem. Yeah. Mm-hmm.
Exactly. I can just add therapy, and therapy will work out all these problems. And then I can continue this lifestyle and it'll be totally just fine. So of course, therapy didn't work for me because I wasn't committed to it, and I wasn't sober, and I wasn't clear. And by the way, if you're thinking about getting therapy, I would highly recommend being sober when you do it.
Excellent advice.
Yeah. Otherwise, its effectiveness is very low. And so I did CBT, and that didn't really take for me. And then my addiction got worse and worse until I was drinking every day, and it got to where I was hiding it from everybody. Nobody really knew. In fact, my friends still, when I talked to them to this day, they were like, I didn't really think you had a problem. I thought you had it together. From like September, October 2017 to January 2018, it was just like every day I was out partying, drinking, doing, spending everything I had, doing everything. And then 2018 hit. And it all came to a head, and I lost everything that was important to me. And I must emphasize this, everything that was important to me at that time, because, flash forward, those things weren't actually the most important things. I just thought that they were. and I lost everything. I lost everything that was important to me. The relationship, my money, my security, it felt like my whole life just the rug got pulled out from under me. It was the rock bottom moment. And I said I was kind of giving up, but then there was the aha moment where I basically said, well, I can change everything about how I live life right now, or I can die. Those are the two ways I can go.
Yeah.
So I need to change. And so I made the decision, like, I need to change everything about the way I live.
Wow.
From when I get up in the morning to when I go to sleep, everything has to change.
Wow.
And so,
That's incredible. That even just that arc that you shared, the first part of it, of getting to that place, because I personally can really relate to that. The world sees you as having everything together. The world sees you as stable. The world sees you as you're just killing it. You're doing great. But behind the scenes, the amount of effort that it takes and the amount of disconnection that it takes internally to be able to maintain that is really potent. And I think there's so many people in the world now that are dealing with depression, anxiety, all of these very, very common feelings right now, in part because they don't even know exactly who they are, let alone how to express that and communicate that to the world in a way that they believe others will see them as valuable. Right? We put on this facade, we go through the motions because we think that that's what is needed in order to be seen and valued and loved and appreciated and all of these things. But I think so many people just go through the motions thinking exactly what you said, that this is just the way it is. Everybody else who seems to be doing awesome, they're full of shit. That's not real. That's not truth. Yeah.
Well, right. And there is that little element, like, let's say with social media, there is that little element of like wanting to put your best foot forward, and people want to share their wins. People want to share their beautiful moments in life. I have found that in regards to social media, that the actually sharing the dark aspects of my life, I'm using air quotes for dark, sharing the things that I'm working and struggling through, which actually, are our greatest gifts. The things that I'm struggling and working through, and sharing my story has been the most impactful, and the things that are actually ultimately bring me the most joy, because I get to help other people overcome something. And I have to say, when I was deep in my depression, the story that I had created in my mind was that nobody understands me.
Yes.
I was just like, I felt like I lived in, all of my friends and all the people. I was like, how is it that all of these people love me and none of them understand me?
Yep.
And really, that was a personal responsibility aspect, because I wasn't telling them. I wasn't letting them know how to support me and saying, hey, I'm really struggling. I'm really hurting, and I'm really hurting from a really deep place. Understanding that you're not alone, and people will say it over and over. And on top of that, that there are lots of people that understand you out there, would have been very helpful for me in that time.
So in the absence of that, in the absence of receiving the kind of support that you really needed, but you understand now with hindsight, you didn't have an open channel to receive that. When you hit that point and you were faced with this new story, which is I change everything or I die. In that moment of desperation, of rock bottom, and without the kind of authentic understanding and support that you felt that you needed and you didn't have, how did you put yourself back together? How did you support yourself in that process?
Ooh, that's a great question. I mean, it started with I knew people that were sober. One of my friends, I actually knew her. She's a very, very close and dear friend of mine. Her name's Daniela Tudor. She actually has a company now called We Connect Health that keeps people in recovery. And I knew her at the time as somebody who was just involved in the recovery community. She was dating one of my friends, and she actually hired me and booked me to come out and play in Seattle. And so she was one of the first people that I called, aside from Jaden, who is, one of our friends, Jaden. I ended up going and crashing at Jaden's place and just saying, I am done. I need help. Jaden stayed up there. By the way, Jaden, if you are listening, thank you. I've said thank you to her a million times in that I owe her my life. But
we know several people who do.
Exactly. And she stayed up for days because it was a days. I mean, here's the reality of the situation. I feel like I'm somebody who has some privilege towards resources, and it took me 3 days to get into recovery. And during that process, I talked to Daniela. Daniela actually turned me on to an organization that's called Music Cares. And Music Cares is a subsidy of the Grammy Foundation, I believe. And so I sent in my credits from the music that I had produced, and basically the beauty of all of this is that music ultimately saved my life. They ended up sponsoring my rehab and sending me to a place called Elijah House, which is in Pasadena. And I went to rehab for 29 days. It took a little bit of time for me to be creative again, but I made my recovery and my health the most important thing. The next step in that was I got a sponsor who was really hardcore, like no nonsense. Like, you need to make, every time I would bring up some outside problem I had, he would just go, did you go to a meeting? Did you go do this? Like, bring it back to like, what are you putting yourself above everything else? Are you putting your health? Are you putting your recovery? I kept being like, you told me you're willing to do anything. Cause when I got him as a sponsor, he said, are you willing to go to any length to beat this disease? Are you willing to go to any length to recover? And I said, yeah. And any length really just meant putting myself and my health first, and not putting anything in between that. One of the best speakers I ever heard in recovery was Macklemore. And he actually said these words that comes up all the time, that anything you put in front of your recovery will be the first thing that you lose. And I say that you can put health or yourself in replace the word recovery in that. When it comes to creativity, in my experience, in my opinion, putting yourself first and generating it from within is where the best of the creativity comes. Yeah. It doesn't come from all that outside comparison and all those outside things. You can get inspiration and gain inspiration from things. Yeah. But that ultimate generator is that within. And so in that era of my life, I fell back in love with myself. After recovery, I started investing in myself. I started reading books, right after recovery, I read 4 Agreements and A New Earth back to back, and started really working on essentially my soul and my spirituality and my relationship with myself and the universe. And then I kept investing into myself. In fact, every year, I think we should invest into ourselves in some way, into our growth. So that was 2018. And then 2019, I did a 100-day really intense emotional intelligence class that was all about accountability and learning myself. And in that, I actually learned about how that whole era of my life I was living, I did everything because I was afraid of being abandoned. So everything came from a place of fear and scarcity. And so I identified that, and then I saw how to get rid of those patterns. And then with getting rid of those patterns, I was able to address my codependency, and I was able to overcome codependency in my relationships and just in my life. I mean, we're not perfect, and obviously
Certainly.
we're always going to slip
Yeah.
at times. But now I have the awareness to see
Yeah.
when that happens.
Yeah.
And then through that, there was a time at which I looked around and I realized I wasn't depressed anymore. And that was a massive thing that I was in. If you go back to 2018, I was taking antidepressants, which were making me worse. I was clinically diagnosed as severe depression. And to get rid of that from my life was mind-blowing. Although I have to say, it wasn't even like the goal that I was going towards. It was just a byproduct of focusing on myself. As I was able to help myself and get out of addiction and depression, I really wanted to help people. I was like, I really just want to use the skills that I have in in audio and production to help people. And so when I was in that 100-day course, my now business partner in I Am Retreats, Chelsea Pierce, reached out to me and said, hey, I want to start a retreat company that centers around sound and uses sound to help heal people. And that was such a yes, where I just said, yes, like this is it. This is the thing that I want to do. I think in those moments, we really got to trust our gut and our heart, and like, what is the full body yes in that?
I think part of the trouble that people have is in identifying what voice is what, right? Because if you go,
Right.
if you face an opportunity or a really a tough decision of any kind, I think a lot of people, as they start to feel into themselves, they can't always decipher what's the voice of fear, what's the voice of the inner critic, what's the voice of our mothers telling us that it was dangerous, or our teacher telling us that we don't have skill here, or whatever. So in all of that noise, I think that the challenge of identifying which voice is your intuition, which voice is your authentic self, is one of the greatest challenges. So do you remember your journey or your struggle, or do you have any advice or wisdom that you might be able to share on how to identify which voice is which?
I mean, you will hear these in different places, the whole love and fear concept, that if you can break all emotions and all thoughts and all things down, they can, almost all of them can be placed into two categories, which is love and fear. And so with decisions that I make, I will often ask that question, the love or fear sort of question. And I look at it where it comes from, like, and for me, a lot of my love comes from a place of service. So when I go to look at a decision that I'm going to make, I think of the words like, how can I be best of service? You know, how does this serve others? And the thing is, it doesn't mean that we should ignore ourselves, because the checking in with ourselves comes with, which one of these decisions best aligns with you? Which one of these decisions do you feel is a better it works better with who you are, which one feels just better, which one feels could be easier, which one is a path of maybe least resistance, you know? If I break down when I was getting over my codependency, the thing that really helped me understand and get over it was the concept of literally, like, let's imagine you're walking on a path and you're walking on a path and somebody is trapped in a well or somebody has a problem. And then you leave your path and you go and do whatever they're doing and jump into whatever their whatever their problem is. And that's what I was doing over and over. Instead of continuously just marching down my path, and then people will gradually follow you. In AA, I learned about attraction rather than promotion, which is that same concept of just marching down your path. So if you want to create something, you just start marching in that direction, and the things will follow. Things will follow you.
Isn't that so interesting that one of the primary fears that you acknowledged was this fear of abandonment, right? And it's common. Most people have on some level a fear of abandonment because it's part of our primal survival instinct. Abandonment in the past used to equate to death, right? Now, loneliness can feel like death, but not quite as threatening as it was previously. But the metaphor that you're using now about abandoning your path and the source of so much of your suffering and that story that you were playing out over and over didn't come from somebody else abandoning you, but instead, ironically, it came from you abandoning yourself.
100%.
Right?
I was abandoning myself over and over.
Yeah. And that's the healing. The healing process is returning to yourself and building a home in yourself where you can talk to that inner child. You can talk to those scared, freaked out parts of yourself and say, I got you. It's okay. I'm not leaving the path. I'm moving forward. Like, we're okay. And then, the energy starts to circulate and things tend to effortlessly start moving in that direction with more momentum than you ever could have forced or designed for.
100%. Yeah. I mean, and to touch on that, when you go and create anything, no matter what it is, let's even say it's dinner, how often does it turn out exactly how you envisioned, right? Literally never. So you don't know what you don't know. And it's going to change. My path has changed a lot. I mean, let's even say with COVID hitting, my path changed, and I've ended up doing different things with going and just doing things, like doing the next thing, the next action. It's interesting what opportunities end up coming your way, because, I've just had so many opportunities in my life that have shown up out of nowhere. And there's absolutely no way I could have ever predicted where I would be or what I would be doing. Everything that I've ever gone through, all of those really, really hard times. I think I remember you talking when you brought me onto the podcast. You wanted me to talk about the loneliest day of my life or the worst day of my life. I look at that day all the time. And it was the day that I got sober. It was 1/18/18. The day that I got sober. At that point, I had, a partner that didn't want to talk to me. I had, a family that I felt that was disappointed. My health was on the rocks. I was literally shaking. I was shaking from DTs, from alcohol consumption. And then I was like, I felt like I had nothing. And I was also in pain, in the most pain I've ever been in, because my body was getting over all this. My head wasn't there, like nothing was there, right? And I've never felt more alone. in that moment. And I think about that day consistently to now, because now every day is literally a gift. But also, I learned so much from that time, from that feeling, from understanding and being with myself, from just sitting with myself. And yes, there was a community aspect for that month. There were other people in the rehab center, and there were meetings that I went to, and community is important. But when COVID came, what I was telling people, and I spent more time on the phone in 2020 than ever in my life, talking with people, just reaching out to people, and sharing experience and just going through and processing things. And what I said over and over again, I was like, you are being given a gift right now. And the gift is being with yourself and being able to sit with yourself and to understand and reflect on what is important in life. You know, what is important to you, and to be with yourself. And yeah, it's gonna suck sometimes. It's gonna be really painful, but cry it out. You know, you need to punch a pillow or scream or yell or whatever it is. Yeah. Get it out. Yeah. Do it. You know, do whatever you need to do. Those painful moments, that hurt, like there's so much learning. There's so many gifts in all of those. And I'm not saying don't feel those feelings, because definitely feel those feelings. Because I'll tell you, coming from addiction, not being able to feel feelings is hell. And being able to feel all the feelings is fantastic.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it's part of your vitality.
It is. That's life. That is life. And there's so many nuggets of wisdom that you can extract from those moments of pain and that hurt that you may be going through. So it's an invitation just to say, you know, if you're hurting, what is the lesson there? Because there is one. And so now in my life, on a day-to-day basis, often I'm resistant to stuff. I don't want to do things. And typically those are the things that I need to do. When I was in early recovery, my sponsor had me do what's called a 90 and 90. And it's go to 90 meetings in 90 days. Whatever recovery you're into, AA, NA, OA. And I actually incorporate this into any sort of coaching that I give people now, where I say, every day, do one thing for yourself, just one thing, and don't compromise it, and see how long you can keep that streak going. I typically say like 1 hour a day. So to give an example, at the beginning, when my sponsor said, go to one meeting a day, I was like, do you know how busy I am? Yeah, right? That's the beautiful egoic thing that we all do. Yeah. Do you know how busy I am? I'm important. I'm super important. Which, by the way, was like, you know, I can even look at ego as an element of my addiction, trying to show its importance and say like, hey, I don't need this. And it is exactly the thing that I need. And so what I did is I said, yeah, I'm too busy. How, you know, it's an hour meeting a day, but I need to drive to the meeting. I was living in Los Angeles. I need to drive to the meeting and drive back. So it's like 2 or 3 hours every day. And like, I made up this whole story, right? He was like, just do it. Just do it. And if, you know, in 90 days, if your life isn't better, you can go back to doing how things were. You can go back to doing it your way. Just try it my way. Try this. And I was like, okay. So after about 20 days, it became effortless. After about 30 days, like a little over a month, I noticed that I actually had more time in my day and I was getting things done better. At 2 months, I just noticed that my life as a whole was better. You know, everything was a lot more clear And then also when I wanted to start other new habits or other new things, it was effortless because I was already in practice of this one thing that I was doing. I just let it snowball after that. And so I think that that's the whole like take action now, but it doesn't have to be difficult. I mean, for me, that changed my entire life. It put me into this level of action that now is continuous, that I'm able to reactivate at any given time by just kind of like nudging it, shoving it forward and going, what can I just start with now? What is the first baby step?
So I would love to ask you, just kind of in bringing this full circle here, considering all that you've shared so far, and considering that your life now is, more simplistic and more intentional and more deeply connected than it has been before, what kinds of practices or tools or daily experiences do you invest in to support yourself in being able to stay in that place?
For me, I respond really well to coaching. And even so much that my friendships, I have coaching friendships that are in there. So I have other people, I try to surround myself with people that have a similar outlook on life, a similar sort of mentality on like for me, what I call a growth mindset, of constantly working on yourself, checking in on yourself, the ability to give each other feedback and receive it as love, and not take it necessarily personally. Nobody's perfect, and sometimes you are going to take feedback personally. That's just part of the process. But having that sort of coaching friendship, coaching relationships with people, I think it's important to have that. It's important to have mentors. It's important to be learning. One of the best things that somebody ever told me when I was getting in, it was actually Daniela, who I was talking about earlier. I think it was her that told me this. The words that she said to me was, nobody knows what the fuck they're doing. So
Truth.
No matter who they are, no matter how big they are, nobody knows everything about what the fuck they're doing. And so always be a student. And so she's like, so come from that place, and you'll always be a student. You'll always be humble. So I think the way that I keep it going is that I really am always that student. I'm always, because that's another form of self-love, always trying to nurture yourself, learn new things, but understanding that a quote that I literally live by, that I read at the beginning of my recovery road, was by Neil deGrasse Tyson, that the universe is under no obligation to make sense to you.
Yes.
And it's okay. You don't have to know. You don't need to know. You just need to be willing to show up and do it, and to learn from it.
So in closing here, I have one final question for you, and you've touched on it already many times. But if you were to give some words of wisdom or supportive advice for somebody who is at maybe an earlier stage of their reinvention journey, or if you prefer, maybe something that you would have wished that you could have told yourself when you were in an earlier stage of your journey, what would that be?
Oh, for creativity, I definitely have it.
Okay.
And so as somebody who made this mistake over and over and over again, here's what I can tell you, is when it comes to creativity, do it for you. Don't do it for anybody else at all do it for you, because create for, so let's say you want to make music. I'll give music as an example because it's what I know. If you want to make music, start recording it, start just making things, and then worry about where they're going to go. I'll tell you, it's taken some time for me to even launch Reyes, my individual project that I'm launching this year. I've been performing under that as a DJ, but for releasing original tracks, it's taken me a while, but I've just come to grips with that even myself, of like, I am just making this music for me. And if you look back at Grammy, I think Lady Gaga said it at some point in her Grammy acceptance, about something about creating music for her. And you see so many artists that will talk about this, and that it's the truth. You got to create it for you. Create it because you want to listen to it. Create it because you enjoy it, because it's something that it fills a need that you have, whatever it is, because it brings you joy. Do it for you.
Yeah. Love it. Oh, Johnny, thank you so much for giving me so much time, for being so vulnerable, for really going into the deep, swampy parts of yourselves in order to pull out these gems and these nuggets of wisdom. And it's very clear to me your commitment to service, your commitment to supporting other people, and your ability to alchemize your pain and suffering into something beautiful that you can pay forward. So thank you so much.
Oh, thank you so much. It was an honor to come on here, and I'm always happy to share my story. And if if any creatives or any people out there are listening and do need some support, you can find me on Instagram at _IamReyes. And you can literally just message me and reach out to me. And then if I can't help you, I can guide you in a direction to get you some support if you need that, or if you ever just want to chat. I mean, we're all, as artists, we're all a big community here, and we gotta support each other, and I'm happy to be of service.
Mm-hmm. Thank you.
So thank you, Brooke. Thank you for having me on. I appreciate it. It was fun.
Thank you so much for listening to today's episode of the Art of Lost and Found podcast. I hope that you are feeling inspired and empowered to go forth and explore your curiosity and creativity. As always, if you want any more information about any of our guests or the show notes or anything we discussed on today's episode, you can head over to www.brookeeston.com/podcast. Thank you so much, and looking forward to seeing you in the next episode.